Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Coach's Corner. I'm Jeffrey David Hartford, your host and the coach. That's the conduit of optimism, altruism, consciousness, and health. And today, there's a topic that I've been paying attention to for quite a while now. There's a lot of literature coming out about the benefits of, from a therapeutic standpoint, of utilizing psychedelics. And we have a guest today that is a specialist in that, in somatic therapy, in integrating psychedelics into the therapy. He runs a facility in Brooklyn and I believe a place in Connecticut as well, I read. The Caring Cove. Today's guest is Jorge Arias. Jorge, thanks so much for joining us, man.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. Truly my pleasure. As we were chatting a little bit before I hit record, we were brought together by a mutual friend named Jamie. We'll keep it at that. Don't want to tell too much about it, but shout out Jamie. Thanks so much for connecting us. And actually, I should have pulled it up to quote him exactly, but when I told him that we had set a date and we were doing this, he was really excited. And he essentially said that we are the two people that had the greatest impact on his healing journey. And I mean, I'm not exaggerating if I tell you I had to wipe tears away when I read that.
Yeah.
And, as I told you as well before we hit record, just that initial intro call that we had together, I knew within the first 3 to 5 minutes that we were kindred spirits and that there's something special going to come from this conversation. So all that being said, I know you were born in Argentina. You dealt with some stuff from literally birth, some things that really right off the bat, you were challenged. And I feel in many ways, life will throw us some challenges. And for most of us, it's a challenge to help us to awaken to our path and discover what our purpose is in our time here. For some of us, it's a far more abrupt and really, shocking, jolting type of thing. And many, it's a slower process that some sadly never really get the lesson from. But I'd love to hear the backstory,
Sure.
From your words. I know I read through the website, but I would not do it justice if I told it. So I'll throw it to you and interested in hearing it.
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming Jamie. It's really touching to hear. That's kind of why we do this work, explore
Absolutely.
our own healing to support others. So that's already touching me. I will say that I'm mostly in Brooklyn these days, not as much in Connecticut, just to make that correction. No big deal. And I was born in early 1982 in Argentina during a military coup. The end of the military coup during the Falkland Island War. A lot of trauma already intergenerationally in my culture after years of military control. And I was born about 6 weeks premature. And things seemed to be going okay at first, but at the 5-week mark, I had some kind of respiratory infection and a mini stroke and was hospitalized for a few weeks in an incubator. My mom actually found me kind of face down and purple, and she's a doctor, and so she was able to resuscitate me and got me to the hospital. But I was basically in and out of life for the first week or so. Apparently had B-fibbed, what they call it, died 5, 6, 7 times. And it was, really challenging, I imagine, from my mother, my family. But the more I understand about somatics and trauma and how memory works, we think that won't really impact us, but that's kind of already layered in. Even at that early stage, this kind of trauma is like hanging out in the body. There were some immediate impacts. I lost the use of my left side, for example, very minimal use. It was considered that I likely would be special needs or wouldn't, live a very healthy life. But, was constantly being cared for, constantly in some form of therapy. Even my mother was constantly like activating my left side. You'll see me as a baby kind of like leaning and like falling over quite a bit. And throughout my life, teenage years, especially adolescent through teenage years, I would just get sick all the time. I was underdeveloped, underweight. I would say every 3 or 4 months, some kind of infection, sinus, bronchitis. Developmentally was really hard. We moved to the U.S., to Kentucky when I was about 4 years old. And I just remember really struggling to like learn the language and just really keep up with everyone else. and a lot of physical discomfort. And at that age, it's just you don't really know what's happening. And no one actually knew what was happening. And trauma and PTSD and these things just weren't really common nomenclature. But I basically have been in physical therapy most of my life. And as I started to like heal and recuperate and kind of catch up developmentally, I started getting more into my body. Yeah. And those were the things that made me feel really good. If I can stay with exercise, if I was able to stay in movement, I could feel my body, coming online. And I want to say that around that time, because in my late teens, I was so in question of things, that I ended up getting into Buddhism and mantra quite early. And was given a mantra. I was probably 13. And I would chant this mantra, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And something about this regulated my nervous system. 10, 20 years later, they do research, and it turns out just that practice of inhaling and chanting something, and the exhale is so long. There's actually neurological, biological things happening that help regulate the nervous system just by chanting that mantra and other mantras as well. So that was one of my first practices that just helped me feel more regulated, helped me feel more grounded. And from there, I moved on to just continue to explore my own healing through somatic modalities, yoga, something called Feldenkrais, move. I would do maybe get into ecstatic dance, and just moving, I could feel catharsis, things moving through my body. There was no story attached, right? A lot of times in somatic healing, you don't really have to have the story in order to release through the nervous system. And somewhere along the lines, 1920, I was always kind of a very straight edge kid, moved to Hawaii for my undergrad, where I studied oceanography and psychology. And I remember smoking cannabis for the first time.
Yeah.
And that experience was overwhelming. It was like, I remember like catharsis. I remember grieving, as well as that birth trauma. There was, significant childhood trauma, developmental trauma, relational trauma within my family constellation, but also just as an immigrant growing up in the U.S. in the mid to late 80s and low poverty line, all the things that entails. And so through my understanding of spirituality and science and psychology, which I was studying at the time, I started having these experiences that were pretty unique to other people around who were just, getting high or taking psilocybin and having these recreational experiences. I started to unfold things. And I think because my background in like Buddhism and yoga and my interest in psychology, I was able to do this thing called integration. I was able to start to make sense. It wasn't really a thing that we were talking about then, probably in the underground, people were talking about integration, but I was able to get these downloads, have these visions, even in a recreational scene where my nervous system would unfold. And I would go into like deep catharsis or grief around some of my childhood experiences. Much later when I got deeper into medicine work, kind of into that early pre-memory trauma. But immediately, because I started unfolding, I was like, wow, there's something here for me. And because I had like a scientific mind, I was studying oceanography, I was just like, oh, I could do my own research here. So I kind of started doing psychedelics every weekend for a couple of years. Wow. Sometimes in the recreational scene, and I would just take notes. I would be like dancing with my friends, and I would just like stop, and I would just like write things down. And sometimes I would just do it on my own. Sure. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I take this dose or this dose. It got to the point where when I was 21, I would microdose without really knowing. I was just like, I'm going to bite this mushroom. I'm going to go into school. I'm going to go into out with my friends, and it's going to help me kind of navigate my emotional anxiety, social behavior. And it also supported me in like not drinking alcohol and not using other substances that I was kind of using at the time to mitigate my own social anxiety.
Yes.
And then years later, it's like, oh, microdosing and small doses. So I guess I just got really lucky and really curious early on. And that's really allowed me to unfold in my own healing. And also just somatic modalities, got really curious. Never thought I would be wasn't like the goal to be a somatic therapist or psychedelic integration therapist. It just kind of happened over time to the point where at one point I was like, oh, this is all lining up now.
Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah, I mean, that journey is incredible. And I mean, just from literally day one being born premature and the number of challenges there. Now, obviously, a blessing that mom was a doctor and was able to give you some guidance. So, you know, it's really interesting to always hear somebody's personal journey, what brings them to where they were and, you know, to where they are today. And, you know, I also read that you did a lot of traveling, but with your traveling, there always seems to be this level of curiosity. You're not just traveling to run away from things. You're traveling to discover yourself within these things and learn more. And there's really something special in that. And, you know, you use the phrase lucky. I don't know. I always push back when I hear somebody say lucky, and I really stress, you know, you hear luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So I guess you were lucky in that regard. You did the work, you were prepared. So when an opportunity presented itself, you were ready to take it. So I guess from that sentiment, we can say you were lucky, but you created your own luck in that regard. And it's interesting too. I love these conversations specifically around psychedelics today because it's starting to take some of the stigma away. And, you know, you alluded to drinking and some other substances that people might use. Generally speaking, at least in my experience, both what I did personally and what I've observed people do, when we use something like that recreationally, it's to run from the reality that we've created. And we don't recognize, we don't honor the fact that we created that reality we're running from, nor do we even recognize that we're running from it. We think we're just going to let loose, going to have fun, going to let off some steam. But, you know, it's really scary to me. And thankfully, now I've just over 2 years alcohol free myself. And it just kind of happened. You know, it went from 1 year doing a dry January, and that calendar year, that was 2022. It was like a combined 6 months all in that I didn't drink, but I had some drinks the rest of that year. And then the following year, so 23, I decided to do it again. And it just continued. It was interesting. It was no intention to say I'm never going to drink again. And I still don't even say that, but just removing it to feel better and feeling my body continuously getting better and better and better. I have the sense of, why would I want to put that poison in my body now if I feel this good? And that's what I was doing it for. So it's exciting for me personally, but I want to share that story with people and kind of pinpoint that some of the substances that we have normalized in our culture are quite literally poisons and toxins, and some that got stigmatized can really be the true medicine. You know, that distinction between, I think it's Gabor Mate says, a drug is something you have to continuously take to get the result you're looking for. A medicine is something you can take a limited amount of times and actually open up opportunities. You heal from using that medicine. And that really is what this sounds like. So, you know, I guess I want to jump right into it. Through, you already touched upon a lot of your experience personally, but I'm really curious from the therapeutic side. And actually, real quick before I forget this, you alluded to the somatic therapy and that there isn't even necessarily the thought behind it. It's just the movement, and that alone is healing. When we recognize that, especially in our culture, we have a tendency to push our emotions down and we bottle them up internally. Just that idea, I haven't even heard it that way, but the somatic therapy being just movement to release that emotion without even necessarily talking about it or thinking about it. So I guess I kind of opened up two rather big doors there that I can let you guide us down.
Yeah, I like that about medicine, what Gabor Mate says about drugs and medicine. I've always said, like, anything can be a medicine until we use it like a drug. You know, and I'm guilty of that. There's definitely initially when I smoked cannabis and did these medicines, I remember my first, just as you were talking, I remember my first MDMA experience. You know, I was 21. I was very shut down. I was very guarded. I was very protected, you know, and I just experienced like love and self-worth and love of self and love of universe and love of others. You know, the word love used to kind of scare me. You know, people I barely knew or friends who I had kind of met would say, I love you. And in my system, unbeknownst to me, that was dangerous because people who had said, I love you, caused me quite a bit of harm in my youth. And that would be a somatic experience, right? Like, why am I so triggered by this word? When I really should be open to it. And so I do want to name that in my own journey of 20 years of exploring psychedelics and therapies, I've definitely also have unskillfully used them. I definitely have also fallen into distancing myself from my own pain with substance. And sometimes when I love your story about alcohol, because sometimes when I've tried to give up alcohol or cannabis that I had quite an attachment to after a while, I would set these kind of goals, like, don't do it for a month, don't do it. And this kind of rigidity created this kind of resistance that made it really hard for me. It required will. It required me to like really grip and get there. Where now it's just like, oh, this doesn't work for me. This doesn't make me feel good. If I smoke cannabis and drink, I start to feel self-doubt. I lose my energy. I lose my focus. And so that's like something I want to share too. Like sometimes the way we approach the thing creates this rigidity, this resistance in the mind that we are kind of unaware of. So I just want to say it's like to be cautious with psychedelics, because it's even the most skilled, experienced person can use them to dissociate, use them to distance from the pain. Which is one of the reasons that we do guided work with blindfolds within an indoor container, not a lot of times outdoor in nature, although there's nothing wrong with that, so that we can go into the discomfort. So somatic therapy is more like a bottom-up approach, right? Cognitive therapy, CBT, which is like one of the more empirical studied modalities, is really cognitive, and you kind of start to change behaviors and reframe thought processes, like I'm not worthy or I'm not safe. Where somatic therapy can get more into event memory and something that's called, I don't want to make a mistake here, something that is called procedural memory. So these are kind of automatic, procedural memories are things that are automatic: driving, working out. And they're kind of like locked in the system. They're locked in the body. And they're just kind of there. We don't really we can't consciously kind of contact them. Event memories are also in our nervous system, usually stored if they're like highly emotional, could be positive, could be negative. Those we can actually go into and contact. But behavioral, more like talk therapy, cognitive therapy, that kind of approach really only contacts semantic memory, events, beliefs, recall. And so it can be pretty limited to contact trauma, to contact depression, to contact anxiety. CBT, for example, is very researched because it's kind of easy to research. It's easy to create control studies, where somatics is kind of hard to create a control and see how someone can change over time because there's so many variables. But in clinical studies, even though it's like considered the most effective type of therapy, for anxiety, depression, and trauma, there's like a 5 to 10% effectiveness. So it can be a good place to start to kind of reframe beliefs. But after 6 months, 12 months, it's really limited. The effectiveness of it goes down. And you have to also kind of continue to do the thing, continue to do these practices. So it does require a bit of will. It does require like holding on to the wheel. Where in somatic therapies like NARM, which contacts developmental trauma, Hakomi, which is more of a Buddhist mindfulness-based form of relational somatic therapy, it can kind of contact self-sabotaging, attachment wounds, hidden core beliefs that we actually don't even know that we have, that might actually impact the way that I'm walking, the way that I'm sitting, the way that I feel in your presence. Right. And so just by going into the body and staying in the present moment, where cognitive behavioral therapy or psychoanalysis might actually go into the past intentionally, in somatic therapy, we don't need to go into the past, because whatever is happening from the past is happening right now. Right. My past I'm carrying my past. I'm relating to you with the lens and my projection and my transference from my past. Relationally, we're always kind of unaware, unintentionally reacting to our own relational wounds from the past. So we can't really meet ourselves in that organic way. And so in these practices, we kind of tune into the body first. And through these breath work, maybe even touch, structural integration, but also just relating, like understanding like my projection, my transference onto you if you were the therapist, and also me as a therapist understanding my own kind of transference, like what's happening for me between me and Jeff that is impacting this relationship. Can I be as aware of my own transference so that I can better hold space for you? And in that kind of more somatic, mindful awareness, we're contacting the nervous system. I often tell my clients that mindfulness is the language of the nervous system. And a lot of times, we manage ourselves in different ways. We manage ourselves through movement, through talking, through fawning, through freeze, through fight. I'm a bit of a mover, as you could tell. I'm always adjusting, Some people might always be fawning, like really concerned about the therapist or who's helping them. Others might just be chatting. And these are all ways of like dissociation that have become useful in our lives.
Sure.
They're not negative. They're actually positive. Like, thank God that we've found these ways of managing our core wounds. But if we inhibit them and go into them mindfully, the nervous system is likely going to activate. Yeah. So if I stay perfectly still because I'm such a mover, my feet are always crossed. If I really just kind of know that's my coping mechanism and I start to stay still, I'm going to start to notice the reason why I fidget so much. Right? Because maybe staying still when I was a kid was not safe.
Yeah.
Right. I needed to be moving. I couldn't really be home all the time. I needed to be out playing. Even when I was at home, being still didn't feel safe. My nervous system was always quite activated. And for others, fawning might have been the way that they stayed safe. Like, oh, well, if this person isn't caring for me, maybe I can really care for them. And in that way, I'll stay safe. Yeah. Right. And so in a somatic, in Hakomi, for example, we might get mindful and we'll start to feel the nervous system activate. Could be feelings, could be sensations, maybe emotions, maybe even like images and thoughts. These things are coming up. And if we can dive into them, it can be quite uncomfortable, much more uncomfortable than, having an ego to ego conversation, which is basically talk therapy. That can be useful to a certain extent, but it's probably not going to contact the deep relational wound that is hiding in the nervous system. So somatics can be really, really effective, but also quite uncomfortable because we kind of almost have to go a little bit into dysregulation while also using tools to stay regulated, right? How can I stay resourced? How can I stay within my window of tolerance, which is a trauma-informed perspective? If we can stay resourced, practices that help me feel grounded while diving into discomfort. Can I feel the earth beneath me while I go into this heart wound? Then maybe I'll, and can I feel the therapist or guide or facilitator across from me, attuning to me, supporting me while I'm going into like the deepest wounds of my life. It can be quite dysregulating, but can we also be regulated, resourced, find a place of comfort in our body as we dive into the self-sabotage, the attachment wound, the shadow self, and through that, to use an IFS term, like contact the self. Right? We'll have the protectors, we'll have the firefighters, these things that are like, no, don't go here, or like get really active if we touch it. It's like, can we change the relationship with those aspects of ourselves in order to contact the more organic self? And it's really powerful and effective work, but it also requires quite a bit of willingness to go into those wounds. And it also requires a bit more attention and attunement from the guide or the facilitator or the therapist. In CBT, there's techniques. In psychoanalysis, you're kind of hearing and reflecting. In a relational trauma-informed somatic approach, we're creating a relationship. I'm having to attune to you and having to be very conscious of you. I also have to track my system in order to kind of see what's happening in your system so that I don't push too hard. We want to meet that edge. We want to go into that discomfort, but we also don't want to get so dysregulated, which can be easy to do, that we're re-traumatizing. So it requires a bit more attention and presence on the part of the facilitator as well. So both client and therapist guide are a bit more relational, a bit more involved, which has its benefits. We heal our relational wounds through relationship, but it also has its trickiness. Boundaries can get a little bit blurry. We might re-traumatize if we go too fast, too soon. So it requires quite a bit of like willingness to go into those really hard places, but also willingness to kind of like, okay, we've got to take the gas back a bit, got to kind of lean back a bit if it feels like we're going too deep, too fast. And so it requires quite a bit of what we call attunement.
Yeah. A lot of finesse with it, It's wild. As you were talking, I had so many different thoughts running through my mind through my own journey. And I had this sense that, you've referenced now semantics and experience. And generally in my life, I've learned things or heard things semantically first, and then at some point had the experience and had kind of the light bulb moment of, oh, that's that thing. And here's my experience with it. And that's what's made me a better practitioner. Having been in the industry for over 20 years now, I certainly, and now I have a very strong desire to continue to become the best version of myself, both personally and professionally. But, as you were talking about that, I had some reflections going on of the journey of my meditative practice that I've been doing for, I'd say probably close to 7 years now, give or take. That I had learned some aspect of it semantically, but a lot of what you were just alluding to was kind of clicking for me. And I had felt a lot of what I was healing from without thinking it or knowing it. So it's almost, maybe I'm reaching here, but it almost feels that through my meditative practice, I was able to tap into some form of somatic therapy that allowed me to heal. And I think oftentimes going into these things with the proper intention, and as you alluded to, the proper willingness to actually heal, to not necessarily find someone or something to blame, but to just move on and heal from it. And one of the most powerful experiences I had in my meditations actually was I felt the presence of my grandfather as if he was sitting in the room with me. And I tend to meditate with my sleep mask on. And I was about 25 minutes into a 45-minute guided meditation. And it was the most moving, joyful, loving moment I've experienced. And I actually, in the best way possible, interrupted the meditation because I felt tears of joy, just waterfalls of joy running down my face. And I never realized how impactful this was and how much I held it with me. But my grandfather passed when I was in 5th grade. And his funeral just so happened to fall on the day of field day. And my parents knew field day was such an important day for me. And if I remember the story correctly, I went to the wake, the services for the wake, but that funeral falling on that day, they gave me permission to make up my mind whether I was going to go to the funeral or field day. And as a 5th grade kid, I opted for field day. And the older I got and the more I heard my brothers and my cousins talking about the funeral and the experience they all had, I started to feel such heavy guilt. But I think I bottled a lot of it up without even necessarily consciously knowing it. Maybe it was because of my youth. But the older I've gotten, the more I'll reflect back on that. And I never sat with it consciously, but there are probably now 3 different times between, one was the meditation, and I felt like that was his way of letting me know, Jeffrey, it's okay, man. I don't hold this against you. You made your decision. The family supported that decision. It's okay. And this is another amazing one. I'm kind of getting off topic, but it was just such a powerful experience. I want to share it. At my last house, my neighbor, who I didn't even get an opportunity to know very well, we knew each other by a smile and a wave, but his brother-in-law was visiting, and he, for some reason, felt compelled to come over and talk to me. And he reached into his pocket. My grandfather was in the Navy. And this day, I didn't even know. I had to reach out to my uncle to confirm it. But this day was my grandfather's birthday. And this gentleman came over and he was talking to me, and he had a coin in his pocket from the Vietnam War, and it was a naval coin. And we got talking, and he looked at me. He felt compelled to give it to me and share it with me. And I can't, for the life of me, come up with any reason other than it was my grandfather sending him to me. And this was actually years before the meditation experience as well. It's just another one of those things, like just these experiences in life moving you towards this healing journey without even consciously being aware of it. And the third one just happened to fall on his birthday as well. A few years later, for the first time in my life, I found a 4-leaf clover. And it was just one of those interesting things. Like, man, I don't know. I think it was the distinction of the somatic therapy versus more of the cognitive behavioral type of stuff that, as you were talking, it hit me so hard that I was able to heal from something I didn't know was even holding me back. And I'm certain it was through his spirit, his energy coming to me to help pull that out of me. And it was incredibly powerful. I guess with all that, the next question I'll lead to is on topic, but how you determine your use of the psychedelics within it, because my understanding of some of the therapy they've been doing and the research they've been doing into it is this idea of bringing to the surface, and maybe this is more of the cognitive side, but bringing to the surface that memory. So it's often used for PTSD under this, the substance, essentially, right? We're in this altered state, I'll call it. So we now pull up the memory and we dissociate the emotion from the memory. And is that my understanding of how they're using the psychedelics for it? And I guess, so that's my initial question. And then how do you determine when to utilize it?
Yeah, there's a few different ways. I will touch on what you shared a bit. There's so much just hidden from us, right? Yeah. These procedural memories, these event memories, they're like really stuck in our nervous system. And so a lot of times we learn a meditation technique and it's very cognitive, right? It's like, okay, breath, 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 breath. But once it becomes more organic, then things can just arise. And your story touches something I would like to share about like the mystery currently in like psychedelics, but maybe also in like the somatic work, which can be quite transpersonal just on its own, like going into the nervous system and navigating what's coming up with story or without story is quite impactful even without psychedelics. There's a mystery. We're trying to figure out like, hey, how can we do an ayahuasca pill without the psychedelic experience? How can we do these substances without having to go through this intense experience? And more research shows that there's a mystery about how this works within our nervous systems, within the field that we're creating just as human beings. And so once we start to tap into that, I think the mystery kind of takes over, and then these kinds of connections, synchronicities that you described become much, much more common. So I always want to like allow for the mystery of somatic work, of relational work, of just being attuned together, but also psychedelic work. There's aspects of this that we're never really going to understand as humans. As far as like how to approach, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. I think currently we're seeing the mainstream really trying to legalize certain psychedelics for certain purposes. And because of that structure, my perspective is that because of how we legalize things, the FDA requires a medical purpose. So MDMA for trauma, psilocybin for depression, ketamine, et cetera, et cetera. And those are valid. There's scientific research that suggests this is really impactful for trauma. This is really impactful for psilocybin. And so if someone comes to me with depression, I could easily say, oh, considering your symptoms and your history, we should really use psilocybin first. Of course, it depends on what psych meds they're on. You have to be very cautious and support people based off of psych meds. But also there's a different approach. And that might be one of creating like more agency, more sovereignty. Like these medicines, like again, the mystery, work more on intention, right? There's a reason why MDMA works more for trauma, neurologically speaking. To keep it simple, it's a bit more nuanced, but basically it mitigates the amygdala. So it shuts down the fear response, creates more access to trust, creates more access to self-love, compassion. It also fires up the prefrontal cortex, which allows us to create more meaning. And in a trauma state, the amygdala fires up, and it might never fire down, right? Usually the nervous system self-regulates. And so like an impact trauma, like one of war or one of a car wreck, a couple of impacts like that, your nervous system will probably self-regulate back to homeostasis. But it's actually the more regular trauma that maybe aren't so intense. At one point, like childhood abuse, sexual trauma, developmental trauma, these kinds of things, is kind of constant poking at some point might tell the nervous system, hey, we're never safe. So the amygdala kind of stays fired up. And so the prefrontal cortex stays a little shut down. And so neurologically, MDMA does reverse that, which then allows us to go into a really difficult experience with less fear on board and more trust, and then allows us to reframe, retell the story. I think Vesser van der Kolk said, it's not the thing that happened, it's the story that we created. It's not the actual impact of the trauma, it's the story. And if you're a child, or if you're in a trauma state and your prefrontal cortex is shut down or mitigated, you're not going to be able to make rational meaning of what happened.
Yeah.
So that is one reason MDMA is good for trauma. The way that I personally move through, depending on each client and what psych med they're on, I tend to lead initially inviting them with MDMA first for a couple of reasons. It creates like a personal power. It creates access to more agency, more sovereignty. When we experience trauma, when we experience, especially in childhood, we basically get our agency taken from us.
Yeah.
Right. We're not given the power of choice, even sometimes like if the clothes you want to wear as a kid, right? You're, like, I want to wear this jacket today. The other day, my neighbor was forcing a jacket onto their child that they did not want to wear. And this kid was in hysterics, screaming at the top of her lungs. I'm just like, God, should I say something? Like, I don't, it was cold outside. The kid didn't want to wear it. I mean, blood curdling screams. And I'm like, maybe we can just let this go and kind of force the jacket onto her. Even something as simple as that, that's a lack of agency. Right? You're taking away this human being's capacity to choose. And even though she's young, she's making a choice. She's making a very conscious choice. Like, she didn't want to wear that jacket. And so when when our agency is taken away, that can actually be traumatizing. And we lose, our personal power. We lose our self-worth. MDMA is a great medicine to access more of that agency. So for many clients, beyond their symptoms, I would invite them to 1 or 2 sessions with MDMA just to get more personal power online. Yeah. When one has more personal power, then I feel, many in my lineage and teachings suggest that when we do a stronger, more classical psychedelic like psilocybin, like LSD, that can be a little wonky, that can be much more challenging. There isn't that amygdala regulation with psilocybin and LSD and DMT. But there's enough self online at this point that there's a stronger capacity to go into those challenging moments and navigate through that with more ease. Yeah. So traditionally, that's might be where I point someone to and I explain it to that. But also, you have to be, I take an integrative approach. So I really have to be able to customize whatever the client needs. Sometimes I feel like someone maybe has a lot of agency online. And if they want to do a journey, we can move towards that quite quickly. Sometimes I feel like, whoa, we need to actually do 2 to 3 months of like somatic work, really prepare this for you, because of just where some people come in despair, and they're really seeing all this on the mainstream and think that they're going to take this medicine and it's just going to heal them. But it requires much more than that. If psychedelics alone were healing, then I would be completely healed by now. So it requires much more than just a medicine. And it also requires one to be prepared to go into those places. So a lot of times I'll measure someone's capacity to be with their somatic response, to self-regulate, to show agency. Maybe we'll even do like consent agency practices. Like, can you say no to me? Can we actually have you think for yourself? Can we kind of create a more balanced rank where you aren't seeing me as this advice giver, guru, someone who's in charge, right? And if someone doesn't really have that much online to be like, hey, Jorge, no, I may take my time a bit, and sometimes, someone seems really ready. They've already done psychedelics. They have a background, or their specific symptoms would be much more benefited, much more effective with something like psilocybin. Maybe it's OCD. Maybe it's, I work with people with like brain trauma. And so concussion symptoms. So something like psilocybin is likely a better approach. So it really, requires some customizing. Where some people might say, oh, depression, psilocybin, oh, trauma, MDMA. Sure. But, if the depression and all of these symptoms and the OCD and whatever it is, the anxiety is caused by developmental trauma, then it's probably best to start with MDMA. So it really kind of depends on the person and the moment in time. And what's really happening for them, and how, how grounded and how able they are to self-regulate just on their own before entering that space, and how prepared I feel like they are. Yeah.
That's, you've almost got me speechless, but that doesn't happen very often. That you said something there that really got me. I mean, I'll use a word to say what it is to me that you are doing for people, which is an absolute godsend. If you ask me, you're truly empowering them.
Right.
And you just said you're trying to get them to think for themselves. And that is the pivot we need to make in our culture, because I mean, I don't want to get overly political and say things that will, raise people up, but our education system alone, our media, so much of it is programming people to not think and to just sit down, shut up, listen to me, the expert, and then regurgitate to me what I just told you, or just simply do as you're told. And it is so important that we help people to learn how to think for themselves, and how to, as you alluded to, the relationship between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. So many people, the average person doesn't even realize that it's not until about 25 to 30 that the prefrontal cortex is fully developed anyway. And if you start to dabble into too much of whether it's alcohol or other substances before then you're potentially stunting that process anyway. So you lack that ability for that prefrontal cortex to really fully develop and fire and do its job. So it really is. There's something so special about what it is you're providing for people. And I'm certain you've been doing it a while now. You've had a great level of success. So I'm certain they understand it and they know what they're getting from you. But I hope that other providers out there that are doing something, doing a similar practice, have a similar approach, because that to me is so special, to make sure that, people come in and they recognize that this isn't just you coming to see me, the professional, the expert, and you're able to heal because I'm giving you something or because I'm doing something for you. As I often like to say in my massage clinic, all I'm doing is giving your body the stimulus it needs to repair itself. And so much of that is what you're doing. It does take your knowledge, your experience, your heart being in the right place and all that for it to work properly. But that's truly what you're doing. You're giving people the stimulus necessary to heal, and you're getting them to see it that way. So, boy, I hope that message resonates through loud and clear to people in this. Oh, again, you touch on a lot, man. You're getting my wheels spinning. I normally come into these and there's so much back and forth that just organically happens, but I'm sitting here wondering the direction I want to go in right now, because you're providing a lot. I mean, I guess we'll go here. You touched upon this. If psychedelics by themselves worked, you would already be healed. And interestingly, that opens itself up. And I appreciate your, I'll say, authenticity and vulnerability. To say it that way indicates that you still have healing to do, which, if we're honest with ourselves, we all do. There's always room to grow. There's always another step to take in becoming the absolute best version of ourselves. So on that journey, where do you feel you are, and how much more room you have to go?
Yeah, I will touch upon what you just said around empowerment. That's kind of where the name, the Caring Cove, comes from.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, how can I help you find the cove within? How can I help you find that internal healing wisdom? So sometimes people say, oh, you're a healer. And I'm like, no, I am guiding you towards your own inner healer, which is where the idea of like the cove comes from. Like, how can I support you to find that internal wisdom? And I think that's really important, because then, clients can become dependent on us, and they're in these amazing psychedelic states, even in normal therapy as well. It's like, wow, you've helped me so much. Look what you're doing for me. And it's like, no, this is something that you're doing for yourself. I'm just here kind of holding the space to allow for that safety, to allow for that attunement, so that you feel like you can go into those places on your own.
That's beautiful.
I'm forgetting the question you asked. Oh, the psychedelics. Yeah. I think more and more in the mainstream, we talk about set and setting. We talk about preparation and integration. But I think it's often given like lip service, right? To my clients, I say 80% of the work is the preparation and the integration. The journey itself is 20% of the work. It's the most expansive part of the work at times. It can be some of the more challenging work, but that's just maybe where we get some answers. We bring some things up, we knock some things loose, uh, and then we have more access to changing the patterns, but without like real proper integration, without like really going into the material that we just uncovered and really making use of that over time. We're basically just having peak experience after peak experience. Which I'm been guilty of in my youth as well. And without a real relational experience, with another person, I think it's also quite limited. You can definitely get benefit from psychedelics alone, but what's likely going to happen is that you're going to have to do that psychedelic every 2-3 months to kind of maintain, which is kind of what we see in the ketamine world. Well done relational therapy with ketamine, is really effective. But infusions, IMs, I have a personal bias towards, because you're kind of in a clinic, you're in a room, they inject you. Neurochemically, it can affect glutamate and GABA and other neuroplastic things that are kind of above my pay grade that can support depression. But often you see people having to return every month for boosters because there isn't necessarily a relational integrative thing happening. Many clinics don't even have therapy happening. Some research suggests that actually doing more moderate doses of something like ketamine and doing therapy at the same time is much more effective than IVing somebody, IMing somebody. They're blasting off into the astral or the ketaverse, as some of us call it. It can be really effective. It can offer some relief, but in the end, we're not actually processing the relational wound. So I think a lot of that is lacking in the field, especially in the above ground field. But even in the underground, I think we kind of talk about it, but integration is tough. It's difficult to now process and really use the information from a journey to change our behaviors and to go, and then we, at times, we're more tender, we're more vulnerable after a journey like that. We're more raw. And in our system, when we expand so much, our system is, going to contract in some way. It's almost inevitable. But can we mitigate that contraction by using practices, tools, resources, somatic practices to kind of help regulate the nervous system and maintain the expansion, or the changes as much as we can. And I also think at times there's like too high of dosing. People are really wanting these heroic journeys, right? And so that can really be impactful for neuroplasticity. You're going to get maybe more what they call NMDA, which creates neuroplasticity, and this other brain factor can be supportive. However, research also shows lower doses are better. They're more effective for the processing. Maybe you're not completely having an ego dissolution experience, but for therapeutic healing, those ego dissolution experiences, in my personal perspective, aren't really as effective as like taking a lower dose and being in a process with another human being held in that space. So I think we talk about integration quite a bit. It's really tricky to do, and people can get really stuck with the panacea that we're kind of seeing now in the psychedelic field, where they think where they see a video on Netflix of someone who took a heroic dose and then their OCD is gone. There's not a lot of videos of what that person's life like 6 months later. Right. There's a and it's quite possibly they're doing quite well. But there's not a lot of follow through integration in the mainstream, even though we talk about it. And it's really difficult to do. I mean, sometimes I make mistakes in the integration process and it's not as effective for the client. Maybe I miss something. Maybe their system's just kind of like, I can only go so far this time around. So I think in order to make psychedelics more and more effective, we have to really tune into like the relational experience. Really offer it more and more empowerment and choice to the people that we're working with. And also really support them in making meaning, creating a new meaning, creating new stories from what happened from the journey experience. And a lot of people are really kind of chasing that journey experience. And they're really impactful, but not necessarily effective on their own.
That's it. And, what comes to mind for me, I would liken it to, I'll call it my quote unquote bodybuilding career. I've done 3 bodybuilding shows and I opted to do them all drug free. So, anybody in that space understands full well that a drug-free body isn't as awe-inspiring as people who are all sorts of roided out in insulin and all that. But for me personally, it was, what can I achieve on my own through hard work, commitment, discipline, dedication, and so on. And I've taken that same mindset into this healing journey, spiritual journey, and I've used meditation more than I've leveraged a medicine. And I've utilized a little bit of the psilocybin in a meditative state, and that definitely has opened up some other doors for me. And I'm very curious about the next level of it, because you hear some of these stories of people and it's amazing. And I'm very intrigued by what other doors do I yet have to open, and where is that going to take me? I have a sense it's going to be something very special, but I do want to caution the intent behind it. And am I going to get too excited about, oh my goodness, that what I just saw while under the influence, while in that altered state, if we're not able to properly integrate, is that then going to make me feel like I'm not getting there? So much of it is our understanding, that semantic side. And I've personally at least found that the meditation has really opened some doors for me as well. Now I'll segue a little bit. I have a dear friend of mine who, I'll bring him up for 2 different reasons. He's had a couple of different journeys himself. And as we've talked about it, and I shared with him the same sentiment that I just said there about the distinction of my bodybuilding and wanting to do my meditation, my spiritual side. Similarly, he said a journey can kind of be viewed as, if you have a path to walk in a forest ahead of you and you take a journey, it's almost like the journey is this helicopter flight up above to give you a view of what the path is ahead. And then you come right back down where you already were. And now you have that in your mind to know, oh, I can recall that. And then I can go on this journey, and I have that vision. So much of it is the intent and then the integration, that if my intent is that I want to use this medicine to aid me and guide me in my journey ahead, not to replace the journey ahead. It's not going to be the fix, the cure-all. It's going to get me there and give me kind of my map beforehand. And I also bring him up because I think I mentioned him to you briefly on our intro call originally. He is one of the co-founders of a company that will be starting in New York City called Innermost. And a couple of the doctors that are on the team with him were actually behind the MDMA studies that have gone on. Okay. So they've got a great team they're building up. And you were talking about something there that my mind starts to expand with this, that as a body work practitioner myself, doing the massage therapy, the personal training, all that type of stuff, he and I have already talked about what role I could play in this networking, if you will, to be able to build this field of people who can help these patients truly integrate. And it isn't a, hey, come on in for your experience with the medicine and now expect to be healed and see you later and good luck, which of course is nothing like what you're doing. The integration that you're doing with them is incredible. But even for that next layer of letting them know, hey, you're not alone. There are other people. We want to empower you to know that you can heal, you can overcome this yourself, but you have a team of people around who are here if you need it, who are here to guide you in different ways and be a part of your kind of integration team. So, I mean, I instantly thought of you when I was talking with Jeremy recently and about Innermost. I think you're going to play a massive role in whatever way that can be, the networking there. And I think it'll help them as well. So I guess that's that thought process that I'm at, is this integration approach to guide the patients further through the integration to give them more tools, I guess.
Yeah. I love that perspective of the helicopter and seeing the path forward. I think there are like a 1% or more that large dose something can knock something loose, and now they're good on that thing. It depends on how far down their own personal work down that path they want to go. But yeah,
Sure.
in my personal experience, for the most part, it's been, wow, I now see these patterns. I now see these behaviors. Some of it's more easeful, like, oh, go this way. Some of it's more like, wow, I have to be really accountable for some of the mistakes I've made and the own harm that I've done to myself and others. And that's really hard to do,
Yeah.
and so it's really important to have support to hold kind of the shadow aspects of ourselves that come through and lead into like acceptance and understanding those parts. Something else I'll say is a lot of this is done in isolation. Traditional indigenous shamanic practices is all about keeping the community in balance, right? So it's important. A lot of great integration circles are happening to help people, because if you can kind of share your story, just by sharing the stories and just being in community alone can be really healing. And that's one of the big things that the Brooklyn Psychedelic Society is focusing on, is like the power of community healing. And I think that is kind of lacking in group spaces. Many of the groups that I know like do a preparation call, a very simple intake. People come in, they have an experience for a night or two, then they have an integration call. You don't, and there's nothing before or after that except for that call, and that's very limited. It can still be effective. It's still powerful. Maybe there's some connections that are built from those group experiences. Some group experiences don't have any prep or integration. And so something I'm like leaning into more and more later in the fall, maybe early summer, is creating like a group process where we're working together for 3 months. Specifically men's group, but like really preparing, doing somatic nervous system regulation, shadow work, parts work, really getting in the thick of it with each other for a few months, maybe even holding each other's intentions, like knowing each other's intentions and holding those sacred together, and then doing a week-long 5-day retreat, and then 3 months of integration together in community. You don't see a lot of that. I do know some who are doing that in California, but for the most part, that's one of my concerns around group processes. One, I do think group processes can heal in a way that one-on-one can't heal. But there's not a lot of prep, and there's not a lot of integration, and it's becoming more and more this kind of way of creating financial abundance. Well, I can do a group process 1 weekend a month. I have 10, 15 people show up. They're paying less than maybe someone might pay for a one-on-one journey, but I'm making much more. And then there's not a lot of work on the front end and the back end to support these individuals. Not that they're not being supported, but there's something about that for me that doesn't really sit right, which is one of the reasons I haven't gotten into group work yet, because it's just not aligned with how I want to work. I want to spend at least a month or two, if not 3, with a group, and really allow them to get in it together, and then really have them commit to 3 months afterwards. Because it's quite possible that if you don't integrate well, especially after a big group experience like ayahuasca, like psilocybin, maybe that's short-lived. Maybe the impact of that is short-lived, and a month later you're feeling quite back where you were, and now there's shame.
Sure.
And now there's like, oh, what am I doing wrong?
Oh,
why isn't this working? I've read online that people take this thing and now they're healed, and et cetera, et cetera. So that can be kind of harmful and kind of backtrack someone to ingrain even deeper into their own shame and guilt about their incapacities, when really, we are injured. Like I said, we're wounded in relationship. We really need a relationship and community to kind of continue to support us. And many of those group connections, in my experience, can hold for a month or so, but afterwards they fall off. If they even hold for their first month, we just return to our homes, and we have had this big experience, but we can't really share it. And if we do share it, it's really hard for people to understand. So I also want to shout out Brooklyn Psychedelic Society. Also, TAM Integration has great weekly integration circles online for people who have done maybe solo journeys but want more community to regularly support them. And sometimes just sharing the story and getting reflections and hearing someone else's story that reminds you of your own can be supportive without really having to dig deep into your experience.
Yeah, there's a lot there to dig through. So the first thing, we'll go back. One of the things I had mentioned previously, and I was asking you, but I asked you like 3 questions at once. You had alluded to if the psychedelics by themselves worked, then you would already be healed from the work that you did, which, leads me to believe, you still have some healing to do. So we can scratch the surface on that a little bit. But you just touched upon a lot there that I can really relate to in my own journeys, more meditation at this point, in this healing process. I've really gotten more comfortable sharing my experiences in a one-on-one setting, even just in my massage clinic, as I'm talking with clients and sharing examples of what I've experienced. It really seems to allow them to see me through a different lens, and it's me being vulnerable and sharing with them that, yeah, listen, you may see me through a certain lens because I'm the professional you're coming to see, and whatever it is you see about me or think about me, I'm still a flawed person. I still have a lot to work on. And the little boy that I used to be, who made so many mistakes and who was so insecure and so egocentric, I still love that little boy too. I'm grateful for him because he's the reason I am who I am today. And that journey, just talking with people, especially you mentioned it, men, being able to be that vulnerable with other men and open up about those things. That's something very powerful that it's happening more and more, fortunately, but I think we have a long, long ways to go. And I really think it's so important for us to have that willingness to be vulnerable. And I may have shared this with you before. My audience must have heard me say this a dozen times by now, but I have these 4 principles that I kind of use to guide me through. It starts with authenticity. So doing the work to discover who is my authentic self, remaining humble. So humility, that willingness for vulnerability. And those were my first 3 for quite a while, because that was the biggest area of change I needed. But then I recognized there was another layer to it, that you have to have adaptability too. You have to be willing to change. And with all that, that helped me personally for this next phase that I'll touch upon as we're talking about the integration. The aspects of life in our culture that seem to be the most difficult for people to integrate into is, I, as an individual, might feel called to go do this journey, go do this experience, work with this therapist, and begin to heal myself. But for me to then go home and share it with my loved ones, they might not see it the way that I do. And then for the next layer, for me to then go back to work, whatever work is for me. Maybe the career path I chose or the job I chose is part of why I feel so incomplete today, because it isn't fulfilling any purpose. So finding out how to guide people into that integrative approach, into family life, into the career path, and to see it through that bigger picture. Because I think sometimes, at least the big stories, as you alluded to, from the hero dose that we hear, is this individual, many times the stories that I've heard anyway, the people that I'm thinking of now, are early 20s, single at the time, been through really challenging life experiences to that point, and had turned to alcohol or what have you. And then they had this hero journey and everything cleared up, and they moved away, a couple 100 miles away, and just completely changed their life. And the average person's thinking, well, that sounds awesome. I'm so happy that you had that level of success, but I'm married with children and have a house and have this career that I've chosen. I can't do any of that. So maybe that's where they feel limited too. So empowering them to learn how to integrate into the lifestyle that they currently have, right?
Right. There's definitely a challenge around that. To answer the question about my personal work, one of my ethical considerations is, as long as I'm doing this work for others, I need to be doing it for myself. Yeah. There's a decent amount of therapists, psychiatrists who've never done psychedelics, never done ketamine, never done MDMA, and they're offering this to people. I've heard a few psychiatrists say, well, I give people SSRIs and I don't take them, and that's a bit different for me. I understand their rationale then, but if I'm going to be offering this work to people, then I need to be in this work personally. I've guided a few guides came to me over the course of a few years, and they'd been sitting for people for 2 or 3 years, and they'd never been guided. They did an online coaching training. They had a lot of will, a lot of entrepreneurship, a lot of agency to enter the field, had done group work, but had never really sat in the seat of the client, right? And I think that's pretty essential. So for me, as long as I'm holding space for clients, I feel like I need to be in the seat of the client, you know, and if I'm doing, you know, and continuously training, learning new tools, learning new trauma-informed approaches, you know, and if I'm learning to use a new medicine, really diving into that work. If anything, at times, maybe I've dive a little bit too deep and find myself in like, oh no, I'm moving too fast. You know, I should, you know, backtrack a little bit and regulate. But I think also that question for people is personal. It's like, how deep do you want to go on your healing journey? It's not a linear thing. You know, one metaphor I use is like everything in this world moves in a spiral, like the planets, the earth, cycles of the seasons, right? And so maybe we used to use this linear kind of peel back the onion metaphor, right? And I had this core daddy issue, right? And so I'm navigating it with therapy, with somatics, with spirituality, with mindfulness, then later with psychedelics. And I'm like, wow, okay, I've navigated that. Things are improving. My relationship with self is improving. My relationship with the masculine is improving. My relationship with the feminine is improving. My relationship with my father is improving. I did it. Awesome. Yeah. And then somewhere down the line, that thing shows up again. That core wound shows up again. It's different. It's changed. But in a linear approach, I might say like, what the fuck am I doing? Yeah. Right? What's wrong with me? Yes. I thought I fixed this. I thought I did this back here. And that can also, you know, incite shame around your own work, where really it's a spiral, right? And as we spiral, maybe I'm orbiting and my perspective changes, my relationship to this wound changes, my relationship to this situation changes. I'm spiraling. Maybe I spiral and I'm at a distance from it and it's like feels really easeful and the tides change, the spiral changes, and now I'm closer to it. Maybe I'm ascending in the spiral. Yeah. So now I have a different perspective from above. So how can I change my relationship to this wound? Because it's quite possible that it'll never actually completely heal. There's always a bit of scar tissue. Yeah. And that can kind of lead me to your question. Yeah, if you have like a business, a family, these things that you're really attached to and you really want to stay connected to, it's like, how can I change my relationship to how these things impact me? So not only are we like using relational therapy between myself and clients, but also supporting them to like, how do I change my relationship to my anxiety, to my depression? Because a lot of times like, I need to get rid of this thing. It's like, well, we're probably never going to get rid of it. We can really mitigate it or diminish it, but I don't know that this thing is ever going to be completely gone. But I can change my relationship to the work, to my career, to my wife, to my kids. I can change my relationship enough with my inner child so that when I am in those moments that are more challenging, more stressful, I have a new way of relating to them. My nervous system activates in a different way. The way that I care and love my wife and my children, the way that I approach work can be with this new perspective. Right. And so that is kind of important because a lot of times it's the mind just wants to get rid of something, or we say, look, I need to get rid of this. You know, it's like, hey, anxiety is part of life. Stress is part of life. Like our nervous system is supposed to dysregulate. We're not supposed. And I think that's also something that's happening a lot in somatic work. It's like regulate. Well, like to an extent, we also have to allow for dysregulation. We also have to allow for the everyday thing that happens and be okay with it, right? Yeah. And so how can I shift my relationship with these aspects of myself internally, which then will likely impact my external environment? And how can I not like try to cut away the depression, the anxiety, the fear, the shame? Because if we cut it away, we're basically just storing it into the shadow to either impact us unconsciously or to show up later in this really kind of extreme way because we haven't been acknowledging it, you know. And that's also kind of like how somatic parts work. It's like feel the experience, acknowledge the part that's showing up, and like change the relationship. Like, how can this anxiety actually be an ally? How can this trigger? How can whatever I'm navigating with my wife remind me? How can I notice my somatic experiences? Like, oh, this thing is here. Yeah. And now that I know this thing is here and I have these tools online and I have a little less shame and I have a little bit, I just have to accept this experience. And through acceptance, that's also part of DBT, Martial in Hands, like only through like completely accepting something can we change it for the long term. So I think that can kind of help people who are living more regular lives and have to stay in their relationships, or want to stay in their relationships, want to stay in their careers, but from a different lens.
That's beautiful. And it makes me think just about this, the body's constant seeking of this homeostasis. Like if we can view things like an anxiety or a depression in an acute state as it's serving us, that's it's there for a reason. It's helping us and learn to sit with it and be able to feel, all right, what's this trying to tell me? You know, I take that approach with my clients when I talk about, aches and pains in the body, restrictions. They had a really intense event over the weekend. They woke up and their neck is really stiff or whatever it may be. It's like, yeah, that's your quote unquote body language. Your body's trying to tell you, hey, something's off here. We're out of alignment. We aren't moving properly. We don't have the mobility we normally do. And there's a reason we aren't supposed to now go and pick up the 500 pounds, in the gym. Like, hey, pump the brakes, sit back. So it's a very similar approach there. And I think that's really powerful. I like that perspective. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah, something you just said was use the word what instead of why. A lot of times we'll have these experiences, shame, anxiety, pain. It's like, why is this happening? And that's the mind. The mind is analyzing, right? Yeah. And we're trained to ask why. Yeah. And in the work with clients, I kind of almost forbid that question. Yeah. I don't forbid it, but it comes up a lot. I'm like, hey, the why is analysis and analysis is paralysis. Maybe in like the scientific method and in other parts of your life or the world, why is useful. But in this container, why can actually be shaming. Sure. Like I can say, hey, Jeffrey, why are you looking at me that way? Yeah. Or I can say, hey, Jeffrey, I'm noticing this your facial structure. I'm curious what's happening for you right now.
Wow.
Right? And just in that experience, using what and how really changes how the shame, the judgment. We're unconsciously kind of shaming ourselves with this question, why? And so in my approach, once clients have a few intentions, I ask them to create how and what questions, right? Which then feed the psyche. And then just by asking the how and what questions, the answers most of the time just come alive, right? We're just kind of feeding the psyche. We're saying, hey, I want answers to these questions because why, has infinite answers. We're never really going to know why. The mind can create 1,000 whys. Maybe some of them are inaccurate, maybe not. But if I want more self-acceptance through an MDMA journey, I can ask, what's in the way of me having more self-acceptance? How can I accept myself more? These are just kind of basic, but you can use, cultivate 4, 5, 6 how and what questions before a journey, or just continuously be asking yourself, hey, what's this for?
Yeah.
What's my body telling me? How can I work through this?
That can be highly effective in just communicating with people too. That what instantly went through my mind is that moment that with a loved one, you are likely already in an altered state yourself. You're stressed out from work. You're stressed out from traffic. Something's going on. And as you just said, why are you looking at me that way? Imagine saying it to your spouse. Why are you looking at me like that? As if a wall isn't going to instantly go up and now there's tension and a barrier versus actually looking to try to work through this. Hey, what's going on today? Is everything okay? How, that's just beautiful. I think that's such an effective approach to just properly communicate. And it also makes me think, I forget who I heard this from, but it makes me think of like a Dr. Bruce Lipton approach. So maybe it was him or something related, but that our subconscious does not know when we have this inner dialogue, the distinction between other and self. So if we're sitting there and we're programmed to be judging other people, the subconscious is taking that as a personal judgment and it starts to put more of that pressure and that shame and judgment on ourselves. So if we can just work towards programming ourselves to not be judging to begin with anyway, be it somebody else or ourselves, but just understanding that intellectually, that you might be sitting there looking around, you've trained yourself not to say it out loud, so you think you're being better, but you're having the thought still. So your body is feeling that judgment as if it's judging yourself. It's an interesting distinction too.
Yeah.
Anything, is that something that you have any experience with? I wish I knew who it was that I heard it from. It was just the other day I read that.
Yeah, I think I often sit with that in my personal process. Like my own judgment of others when I was younger, and how critical and judgmental. and it always comes back. You know, if
Mm-hmm.
anything, if I'm able to see something in another person,
Yeah.
passive aggressiveness, narcissism, etc., it's like, oh, it's because this is living inside of me.
Yeah.
And that's pretty hard to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
we
That's
all
the
have
thing.
these parts of ourselves, but,
Oh, yeah.
and I've known times of myself where I was like, I've seen narcissism everywhere. And it's like, what's going on? All these narcissists. It's like, oh, my narcissism is really active right now.
That's
And
right.
I have to be able to acknowledge and see that if I want to move through that.
So true.
Yeah.
And that's like, you're in the market for a car or a truck. You want a nice black truck, and you see them everywhere. That's what's
Right.
on your mind. That's what you're thinking. So 100%. I also, it's funny. This is that dynamic where I'll hear or read something and get that level of semantic knowledge, and then I'll get my experience. But I came across the quote, I hate the me I see in you. And then I often pulled from Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make the change.
Right.
So those two things, to try to sit there and be like, okay, I currently feel triggered. That person's doing something. It's not on them. That's on me. They're a mirror to me. And something about that is triggering me. So I pull from that. I hate the me I see in you. I'm not going to get mad at you. I'm going to say, I need to make sure I'm not doing that, because if it's bothering me when they do it, I better make sure I don't put anybody else in that situation by me doing it. Right. And that was listening to the lyrics of that song, man, that just, it hits me still to this day. That's the lyrics of that song. I have to say that's probably one of my favorite songs. And I've listened to it enough that all three of my kids love it and will request it. And I love that they listen to it. It might not hit them quite the way that it does me yet, but it's planting those seeds. And, if I can continue to lead by example of working on myself and become a better version of myself, then that's what they have to model. That's, we're moving in the right direction,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, we're so trained to want to look outside of ourselves, to want to change our external environment. Even religion, it's like God is out here, Jesus is out here, Buddha is out here. And so we're really all the time trying to change our external environment. Oh, if I can just have this thing.
Yeah.
Oh, if I can just own this. Oh, if I can just be this. But really, I think the way the universe works is the more that we can change our internal environment, the more that I have self-acceptance of myself, the more that I love myself, the more that I can shift what's happening on the inside, then I think the external environment just shifts on its own.
Yeah.
Either through the mystery, like you kind of described with your experience with your grandfather, you had access to grieving for your grandfather, you were in that mindfulness state, and you got this message and you let go of something. And then from there, the universe, the external environment changed and allowed you to have more access to that. And so that's a lot of times my emphasis, where the why question is also very external. Right. And so the more that I can be like, wow, what's happening? Even with clients, it's like, wow, what's happening for me right now with this person? The story is making me feel very sad. Their story is making me feel really agitated, frustrated. Like, what's happening inside of me right now within this relational field? And there's sometimes, and I talk about this, we've talked about this in like a group supervision that we have every week where we support each other. Sometimes we're like feeling like our client's very frustrated and like really stuck. And then we acknowledge like, oh, I'm really frustrated with their process. Yeah. And if I don't shift my frustration internally, it's in the field.
Yes.
And it's felt. Because that's how there's even it's even proven neurologically without the mystical experience, which I truly believe. But there's even mirror neurons that if I feel frustrated, you're going to feel frustrated. Or if I feel like less than, people might treat me less than. So a lot of times that's also a part that's missing in guided work, therapy, facilitation. It's like, what's happening inside of me? And how is that playing a role in the unconscious of what's happening between you and me?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you're talking this, you're just full of some gems, and so much of it is having a level of wisdom at such a young age because of the life that you've lived already. There's something really powerful at play here. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I have a vision hitting me that at some point you and I need to get together and put on like a retreat of sorts and do some work together with people. And I love the approach of the body work, the massage approach that I take. I've been really diving deep into the quantum biology side of things. So some sort of a retreat that we can get in touch with nature. And, I don't know how the psychedelic integration part of things works in a group setting on a retreat type of thing. But if there's any way of working that in, that would be incredible. That might be something that we have to discuss a little bit further. And
yeah, sounds wonderful.
Right. Maybe we'll see that we can get some response and feedback. Audience, it's funny. When I record a podcast, I know in the back of my mind, I'm going to end up uploading it and sharing it with people. And I hope the connection that you and I are having, and I get this often with my guests, I feel like I'm just having a one-on-one conversation with somebody, but I do know, okay, there's an audience there listening. And when we upload this, so I will ask you, audience, if you're intrigued by that idea, definitely drop some comments. Let us know. We'll see what we can make happen. But that just feels right in my soul. It feels like something we got to make happen and work towards.
Yeah, and I also think collaboration is essential. A lot of times this work is done solo, therapeutic work, guided work, but more and more local colleagues of mine are creating community. Just because I think, we can't do it on our own. The work can't be done for us, but we can't do it on our own. So more and more like collaborating with other facilitators, but also supporting clients and connecting with each other and having that kind of community connection is really going to ease the way forward.
Yeah.
So definitely interested in collaboration and moving forward in that way. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And I'm also certain people listening through thus far, they're saying, well, wait a minute, tell me more about the Caring Cove. How can I work with Jorge? This sounds intriguing and I need some help. So how do they connect with you?
You can find me at www.thecaringcove.com.
Okay.
And then you'll find all my information there and you can contact me, ask questions,
cool,
whatever you need.
Yeah. I'll make sure I put that in the show notes. And currently no social media presence, huh?
I do have Caring Cove Somatics on Instagram, but I don't actually post that much. I'm actually kind of quite busy with the work I'm offering. There is a part of me that later in the fall would like to start posting a bit more of like what we're sharing here, just a reel a week, a couple of reels a month, just to kind of start offering this information. But gratefully, through the work that I've offered and through the support I've given people, I get a lot of referrals, word of mouth, and I haven't really had to use social media and those things for marketing purposes. But I would love to engage more in that, just to offer more information and just to be more of service to a wider community as well.
Amen. And that's honestly where I see you doing it for. That's the connection that you and I have, the fact that we're doing what we're doing for the very same reason we feel called to do it and we're making an impact. That's why I have the podcast. Admittedly, part of it is, if I want to use the word selfish, in that I want to learn more. Talking to you, I'm absolutely taking notes and I'm learning more and I'm really grateful for it. But I want to provide, my podcast is kind of three-pronged. I want to learn. I want to give my guest an audience to promote themselves to and share their information with. And I want the audience to learn. And I'm 100% certain that all of those just happened with this. And I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah,
so,
amazing.
I can see I'll share this with you. One last thing. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Gary Vaynerchuk is somebody who's left an impression on me. He's just a business mogul type, but his messaging to people that are just really trying so hard to create content. So many people, it's social media can be the career path, and God bless people if they're doing that. That's not my goal. That's not where I'm at. But Gary says, just document what you're doing. If you are doing something of value, just document it, share it, and put it out there. And that can help people. So that's been my messaging. My Instagram page is almost exclusively just me sharing what I'm doing and, a little blurb with it of why I'm doing it, what it means to me. And hopefully it's impacting people and showing them that the man I am today is not who I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and so on. And I can say with confidence that I'm a better version of myself today than I was back then. And I will continue to do that every day. So if just documenting what I'm doing is of service to one person, then it's worth my time and effort.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that approach. Takes a little of the pressure off.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, exactly right. Exactly. Because there are some people out there that are phenomenal at being informative, educational, citing the data and pulling up the studies, and God bless them. That's awesome. And they have a massive following because there is a lot of value there. But I didn't want to necessarily try to repeat what they're already doing. I just wanted to make my own unique thing and share what I do. So I could see you doing that at some point. But listen, I'm really grateful for your time, and I look forward to our continued connections, and I'm certain we'll be sending some people your way from this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm also quite grateful. I really appreciated this time.
Amen. My pleasure. Yeah. Audience, you know the drill. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, like, comment, share, all that good stuff, and go check out the Care in Cove and get in touch with Jorge. Till next time, be well.